So I'm Michael Lambert, a fellow in social inequalities here at Lancaster University, talking about research inequalities. So can I begin by asking, who are you?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm Dr. Eva Li. I'm lecturer in media and cultural studies at Lancaster Sociology. My background is interdisciplinary because I have training in sociology, media and cultural studies, and also gender and sexuality studies.
And so, bearing in mind that quite diverse background about what you sort of study and how you come at things, I mean, what is it that you do?
Yeah, that is a question that could be difficult to answer, but I try to summarize my research into two different strands for the moment. The first strand of my research concerns about fandom, fans culture, participatory culture, and fans identities. So this is actually how I began my career as an academic researcher. I research about queer fandom in East Asian contexts, in particular in Sinophone Asia or Chinese-speaking societies within Asia. I look into how individual fans, no matter they're queer or not, how they engage in different fan practices, how they explore their desires and fantasies, and how these creativities and practices can be related back to their everyday life and everyday experiences. So I'm looking into the relationship between both, and I'm quite interested in how representation can have an impact or in some way empower and constrains one's lived experience of gender and sexualities. And the second strand of my research which is related to the first strand, is about gender and sexuality in transnational and East Asian contexts. So I'm interested in looking into how LGBTQ communities use media, or how they engage with media, and how they engage with different types of media representations and discourses. What are the latest representation out there? What are the new discourses emerging, and how they react to these ever-changing discourses and framings about LGBTQ identities and practices. So, for example, in one of my previous projects, I look into androgynous women in Hong Kong and China. And in fact, I do not use the term androgyny because it is Anglophone, Eurocentric. I use the transliteration in Chinese, 中性 or 中性, to signal that ambiguity and the politicized meaning. So, for both strands of my research, one of the key things I try to engage with is to decolonize and diversify the existing scholarship in knowledge production, especially for non-Western societies. And in particular, like, I look into the coloniality of gender and sexuality research, and I would consider my work engaging with the subfield of queer Asian studies, even though I'm working with both media and culture and also gender and sexualities.
I mean, you've already answered my next question in essence about how you sort of go about the disentangling and approaching and studying and analysing and sort of engaging with these kinds of issues. But how do you research what you do, given its kind of instantaneous, contemporaneous fashion, that it's sort of very much at the forefront in terms of both methodological and disciplinary perspectives, but also your own kind of wider publications?
Yeah. Well, in terms of how I do my research or how I approach my research, I would say I'm mostly a qualitative researcher. My research methods are mostly qualitative and ethnographic. And in terms of theoretical tradition, I draw from like interactionist sociology, queer theory, and different feminist scholarship, etc. And so my main methods are usually discourse analysis and semi-structured interviews. I also did focus group in some of my other projects. So I'm really interested in listening to people's stories, in how they narrate their stories using their own languages, because how they explain their stories in the chosen language have a lot to say about their social position, about their class background. Like, for example, asking someone how they experience same-sex desire, depending on the language they use, this tells a lot about how they access different knowledge about sexuality to make sense of themselves. So this is something that I really enjoy in going through my data, in understanding social lives and inequalities. And another approach that I use is, I would say, is the constructivist grounded theory approach. in particular, when sometimes I'm researching desires or practices that doesn't have a well-articulated discourse or names assigned to it yet, like the example I mentioned earlier about neutral gender or androgynous in the Sinophone context. So I think ground theory approach is useful in approaching ambiguity in social lives or the ambiguities in people's everyday life. So this is largely how I do my research.
And again, I mean, you're doing this sort of beautifully, but you already touched on already the relationship of what you do and how you do it to this wider issue of inequality and inequalities. So I'm just wondering if you can give me, or perhaps re-emphasize one of those you've already given, an example of how your work touches on this issue of inequality or inequalities.
Yeah, I think I can give two examples. One example is relate to queer fandom. So I look into how fans negotiate different meanings in the fandom, how they create different artifacts, fan fictions, etc. And through analyzing these materials and through talking to fans, I'm quite keen to understand the different kinds of fan capital they have in the fan community, their access to knowledge, and in particular in the context of like global or transnational fandom. And sometimes you're engaging with fan communities of another country or Anglophone, basically, mostly Anglophone, and your language ability has a lot to say to determine the level of engagement you can have with other fans, or the other way around, like in K-pop fandom, Anglophone fans have to learn Korean in order to gain the hierarchy in the fandom. So I'm quite interested in looking into this, like hierarchies, fans capital, and of course that is related to inequalities in how communities work. And the second example is, it's related to an example I mentioned earlier as well, is how people make sense of their gender and sexuality, what kind of discourse they own. And for people who are able to enjoy, well, from my research, for people who are able to enjoy gender or sexuality as fluid, as non-binary, has a lot of material foundation. If they don't have good education, if they don't have a decent class position, it's very difficult for them to claim such identity or claim such identity positions to make sense of themselves. They might be more inclined to subscribe to dominant or popular discourses about to understand themselves, like if gay or lesbian or non-binary. Whereas if you have better capital, again, in all sense, you might be able to claim that gender is fluid. You have the freedom to live gender as fluid, while many other people might not be able to do so. So this is one of the interventions that I do always want to make, is that while some theories like queer theories celebrate like the instability of identities and desires, we do have to pay attention to the material reality lived by different people in different societies, different parts of the world, whether they're able to celebrate those desires as like some Eurocentric or Anglo-American scholars claimed.
I think the examples you gave absolutely encapsulate that tension between the material and the concrete and the lived versus the kind of the intangible, identifying and signifying. I think it's a fantastic way to illustrate what you do so well. So lastly, can I finish by asking the kinds of organizations or associations that you're involved with through your research?
Yeah, I'm involved with like a lot of other colleagues, like British Sociological Association, and also the MESA, which stand for the association, the Media and Cultural Studies Association. I need to double check because the name is so long. Sorry, give me a second. MESA UK. The British Sociological Association, Media, Communication and Cultural Studies Association, and also for my personal interest in more recent research interest in Hong Kong studies, in Hong Kong identity and Hong Kong social memory. I'm also engaged, a member of the Society for Hong Kong Studies, and I'm also a member of the Sinophone Studies Society that look into Chinese-speaking societies beyond the China. So it's to acknowledge that the diversity in societies using Sinitic language or Sinophone language. And yeah, I do work with different fan communities, but it's quite difficult to name all of them, I would say. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And Eva, thanks ever so much for your time and taking the moment to kind of run through your research, and very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.